Hello students, organs of our body that can float on the water. Did you know? Take a time. Okay, give the answer. If your answer is there is no organ in our body that can float on the water, but you are probably wrong because we have the exception of lungs. Yes, surprisingly, the only organ in the human body that can float on the water is the pair of lungs. And not only this, but there are many other interesting facts about lungs. Tell me one thing, is this organ that's important? Why? Our lungs so widely studied well. Lungs form the core of the respiratory system, and this system makes sure that we are alive. And how is that done? We have seen how aquatic animals carry out the vital gaseous exchange. Now it's time we have a look at the respiratory system in humans. This is how the complete respiratory system looks like. It begins from the nose and ends at the alveoli in the lungs. Let us get introduced to each part in the detail. First comes the upper respiratory tract. It consists of nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx. Let's discuss them. The complete nasal cavity. If we zoom into the structure, we find that the nasal chamber looks somewhat like this. It mainly has the three regions or the parts. This is a part we are all familiar with, the nose. Any idea what the opening are called? Yes, they are called as nostrils. The nostrils also called as nares. Are these opening just as the nasal chamber within the commences? We have the first region called vestibule region. This region bears tiny hair-like structures which serve different purposes. Any guesses what functions the vestibule region will have? The region has a lining of mucus that has to trap any foreign particle which enters through the inhaled air. Also, the hairs in this region expel the trapped particles out with the rhythmic movement. So the vestibule region has all the arrangements to defend the bacteria or other harmful particles. Let me try entering the system with the inhaled air The next region following this is the respiratory region. This region usually serves many different functions. Most importantly, it warms the air to get it to normal body temperature. Then it moistens it to make it suitable for the body. And lastly, it helps send some air to the third nasal chamber and push the remaining air forward into the next part of the respiratory tract. Now, what do you think that the third chamber would do with the air? Well, the name of this region sees it all the region responsible for the senses. Smell, it contains the highly sensitive cells that is called olfactory region. It receives the signals to the brain and helps to identify the smell. Post nasal chamber comes the next part called the pharynx, that is like a common connection between the respiratory and the digestive tract. And why do we see so well? As you can see here, this acts like a common passage between the nasal chamber on the top and the windpipe, and the food pipe just lying below it. The pharynx is also further divided into the three parts. First, nasal pharynx or the nasopharynx, which is the continuation with the nasal chamber. Oral pharynx or the oropharynx, the one that lies behind the oral cavity. This is the central region. And lastly, that is we have laryngopharynx, which is last region connecting to the next part, that is larynx, that is also called as hypopharynx. What do you think? Is the pharynx important for? Well, apart from the receiving food and air from the respective zones, the pharynx performs one of the most crucial tasks. Imagine what will happen even if a small amount of food enters the respiratory tract by mistake. Apart from the discomfort caused, it will be a serious concern. But how does the food know the way to the food pipe each and every time? How does not the food accidentally enters the windpipe? Well, that's taken care of by pharynx. Do you notice a small flap here? This flap, named as epiglottis, folds over to surface below when the food enters the system. As a result, the opening of the windpipe gets covered and the food strictly passes into the esophagus. The presence of epiglottis makes the pharynx an extremely important part of the system. Now, on on the list of is the larynx, last part, the upper respiratory tract, is also known as the voice box. Now, this name talks about its significance. It is responsible for the creating voice that we have. Yes, the larynx is involved in the sound production. And how does it produce sound exactly? Well, the voice box has lateral folds somewhat like this. Now imagine air to pass through these folds. When they are open, nothing really great can be noticed, but now when they are closed and when air passes through them, then the folds vibrate and this gives rise to sound. And that's how the sound is produced by the voice box. The larynx is just a small box like structure, but in adults it just produced slightly. It becomes more prominent in males after puberty, and this bulging structure in the throat is called as Adam's apple. Well, these three components make up the upper respiratory system: nasal cavity, pharynx, and larynx. Then now we have a glance at the part of the lower respiratory tract in the next